Hey Reddit. I don't usually post stuff like this, but something happened last year that I still can't shake. I've never told anyone all the details, not even my closest friends, because every time I start explaining it, I feel like I sound insane. But maybe writing it down will help me sort through it. Or at least stop the nightmares. So yeah, here goes nothing. I was a college sophomore at the time, going to a small university in Ohio. My name's Ethan Carter, 20 years old then, just your average broke psych major. Classes were killing me, rent was high, and my part-time job at the bookstore barely covered groceries. That spring, my friend Jake told me about a summer gig he had lined up the year before, working as a property caretaker for some private land out in the boonies. Basically, some rich dude from New York owned a huge patch of forest land and had this small hunting cabin and a storage barn out there. He wanted someone to watch over the place during the off-season, make sure no one was trespassing, do light maintenance, keep the place from falling apart, that sort of thing. Jake bailed last minute the previous summer, so he gave the guy my info this time around. I figured, 3 months of peace, rent-free, and a paycheck. Sounded perfect. The guy's name was Walter Maddox, mid-60s, gruff voice over the phone but polite. He said he usually hires locals, but was okay with me since Jake vouched. He emailed me a formal contract and said everything I needed would be in the cabin. I signed it, packed my stuff, and left town 2 weeks later. I should have known something was off when Walter didn't even meet me there. He just gave me GPS coordinates and said the key would be under the stone frog by the porch. That's literally what he said. The drive and the first look. I drove out there on a humid June afternoon. Hey Reddit. I don't usually post stuff like this, but something happened last year that I still can't shake. I've never told anyone all the details, not even my closest friends, because every time I start explaining it, I feel like I sound insane. But maybe writing it down will help me sort through it. Or at least stop the nightmares. So yeah, here goes nothing. I was a college sophomore at the time, going to a small university in Ohio. My name's Ethan Carter, 20 years old then, just your average broke psych major. Classes were killing me, rent was high, and my part-time job at the bookstore barely covered groceries. That spring, my friend Jake told me about a summer gig he had lined up the year before, working as a property caretaker for some private land out in the boonies. Basically, some rich dude from New York owned a huge patch of forest land and had this small hunting cabin and a storage barn out there. He wanted someone to watch over the place during the off-season, make sure no one was trespassing, do light maintenance, keep the place from falling apart, that sort of thing. Jake bailed last minute the previous summer, so he gave the guy my info this time around. I figured, 3 months of peace, rent-free, and a paycheck. Sounded perfect. The guy's name was Walter Maddox, mid-60s, gruff voice over the phone but polite. He said he usually hires locals, but was okay with me since Jake vouched. He emailed me a formal contract and said everything I needed would be in the cabin. I signed it, packed my stuff, and left town 2 weeks later. I should have known something was off when Walter didn't even meet me there. He just gave me GPS coordinates and said the key would be under the stone frog by the porch. That's literally what he said. The drive and the first look. I drove out there on a humid June afternoon. The GPS led me off the highway and down a narrow, winding road that cut deep through forested hills. No houses, no power lines, no signs of civilization for miles. Just endless rows of tall, thin pine trees, packed so close together it felt like they were watching me. After about 45 minutes on that road, I found the turnoff, a rusty iron gate, halfway open, with a barely visible wooden sign nailed to a tree that just said, "Private." No name. No address. Just that one word, faded and peeling. I followed a gravel path for another mile until the cabin finally came into view. It was actually kind of beautiful, in that old, slightly creepy way. A 2-story wooden cabin with a sagging porch, dark green trim, and a tin roof that had rust creeping across it. Tall pines loomed around it, their branches arching overhead like a cathedral ceiling. There was a detached barn off to the left and a small woodshed farther back, almost swallowed by the trees. The air smelled like pine sap and wet soil. It was dead quiet, not a single bird chirping, not even the wind moving. I remember standing there with the car door open, just listening, and realizing how loud silence can be when you're that deep into nowhere. I found the stone frog by the steps, just like Walter said, and sure enough, the key was under it. The door creaked when I pushed it open, and I was immediately hit with the smell of old wood, dust, and something slightly sour, like rotting apples. The cabin. Inside was simple but cozy. The downstairs had a small living room with a stone fireplace, a saggy couch, a creaky recliner, and an old TV with a DVD player. The kitchen was cramped but had all the basics: a gas stove, an old fridge that rattled like hell, a rusty sink, and shelves filled with expired canned food. A faded rug covered the warped wooden floor, and cobwebs clung to the corners like they'd been there for years. Upstairs were 2 bedrooms. One was clearly used more, the bed was made, the sheets were dusty but clean, and there was a little desk in the corner with a lamp and some old maps. The other room had a broken dresser and a bed frame with no mattress. Empty and cold, like no one had entered it in years. There was no cell service. No Wi-Fi. Just a landline downstairs that didn't even have a dial tone when I picked it up. But I didn't care. I unpacked, made some ramen, and settled in. That first night, I actually felt kind of excited. Like I was on some weird solo retreat, disconnected from everything. I had no idea what was coming. The first morning. The next day, I woke up early and walked around the property. There was a dirt trail that looped around behind the cabin, past the barn and into the trees. The barn was locked, thick chain on the door, and I figured I wasn't supposed to mess with it, so I left it alone. By mid-afternoon, I decided to explore the caretaker's shed behind the barn, a tiny wooden structure with a rusted padlock. To my surprise, the padlock was snapped clean open. Not like picked or rusted through, I mean snapped. The U-shaped metal part was broken clean in half. Inside, it was dim and musty, with tools hanging on hooks, a couple of gas cans, and a dusty workbench. But what caught my eye was a small desk tucked in the corner. And that's where I found the list. It was a yellowed sheet of notebook paper, thumbtacked above the desk. The handwriting was blocky, all caps, and looked like it had been scribbled quickly. There were 5 names written on it, each followed by a number. The list read: 1. Brian Reed, 10. 2. Chris Holland, 7. 3. Eric Lawson, 3. 4. Jason Miller, 1. 5. Ethan Carter, 0. I froze. My name. My name was on that list. And next to it, 0. I read it again and again, my heart hammering so hard I could barely breathe. I didn't recognize the other names, but something about the way they were written, stacked like a countdown, made my stomach twist. I tore it off the wall and shoved it in my pocket, slammed the shed door, and walked back to the cabin, locking the door behind me. I tried to calm myself down, telling myself it was probably a joke. Maybe Walter was screwing with me. Maybe Jake had set me up. Maybe it meant nothing. But deep down, I already knew better. Because that whole day, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone, or something, was watching me from the trees. I barely slept that night. I kept telling myself I was overreacting, that the list was just a weird coincidence or maybe some kind of old inventory or schedule, but I didn't believe a word of it. I laid there in bed staring at the ceiling, ears straining at every creak of the old cabin. At one point around 2 a.m., I swore I heard footsteps on the porch. Not heavy, soft, almost dragging. I sat up and held my breath. Waited. Nothing. When I finally forced myself to look out the window, the porch was empty. Just pine shadows stretching across the boards like long fingers. In the morning, I told myself, I need answers. Digging through the cabin. I started going through everything, the drawers, the cabinets, the closets. I was looking for, I don't even know. Paperwork. Notes. A reason. I found a bunch of dusty field journals in one of the upstairs closets, old leather-bound ones. They belonged to someone named Reed, which clicked immediately. That was the first name on the list, Brian Reed, 10. His journals were filled with chicken scratch notes. Mostly weather updates, inventory logs, weird little things about animal tracks and broken branches, like he'd taken his caretaker job way too seriously. But the last entries from him started getting strange. One line stuck with me. Day 9, heard voices again near the shed. Not sure if it's them or me. I flipped back to the list. Brian Reed, 10. Day 10. He stopped writing after that. The landline call. Late that afternoon, the landline rang. I jumped so hard I nearly knocked over the kitchen chair. It hadn't worked the day before, no dial tone, remember? But now, it was ringing. I picked it up, heart racing. Hello. Silence. For maybe 3 seconds. Then a voice, crackly, like it was coming through a long tunnel. Don't go near the barn at night. Then it clicked off. That was it. I stood there, hand still on the receiver, staring at nothing for a solid minute. I dialed back, no dial tone. Dead again. Like it had only worked for that one call. I didn't sleep that night, either. The woods. The next day, I needed to do something. I couldn't just sit in the cabin waiting to go crazy. So I grabbed my flashlight and went hiking around the property. I figured if I kept moving, I wouldn't think so much. The trail behind the barn stretched deep into the woods. There were little markers on the trees, red bands of paint every 50 feet or so, like someone had carved out a path. The farther I went, the quieter it got. I mean, it was already silent around the cabin, but in those deeper woods, the silence felt wrong. Like the forest was holding its breath. About half a mile in, I found an old hunting stand, one of those raised wooden platforms with a ladder going up to it. I climbed it, figuring I'd get a better look around. Up there, the forest stretched forever in all directions. Just green and gray and endless. But when I looked back toward the cabin, and I swear this is real, I saw a figure standing just outside the tree line near the barn. Barely visible, completely still. No face I could make out. Just, standing there, half hidden by the trees. I blinked, looked again. Gone. The scream. That night, day 2, I guess, if I'm counting, something changed. It was around midnight. I was lying in bed, still wide awake, staring at the dark ceiling again. I kept the flashlight beside me, just in case. And then I heard it. A scream. Sharp, sudden, and human. It came from outside, maybe near the woodshed. Not far. High-pitched, like a man yelling in total panic. I jumped out of bed, grabbed the flashlight, and ran to the window. Nothing. The yard was still. The porch empty. But the scream echoed in my ears for minutes afterward. Then, right as I turned away from the window, the porch light flickered, just once, and went dark. The bulb had worked the night before. Now it was dead. Like something had snuffed it out. And then, for the first time, I felt real fear. Not nervousness. Not anxiety. Fear. The kind that sinks into your skin and tells you you're not in control anymore. That something else is writing the rules now. I stayed up in the armchair with a kitchen knife beside me, staring at the dark window, waiting for morning. Morning came, eventually. But it didn't help. Because when I went back out to the shed, trying to prove to myself I was still just imagining things, I noticed something. The list? The numbers had changed. 1, Brian Reed, X. 2. Chris Holland, X. 3. Eric Lawson, X. 4. Jason Miller, X. 5. Ethan Carter, -1. A new line was scratched beneath mine. Ethan Carter, -1. -1. And suddenly I understood. This wasn't a countdown. This wasn't a joke. It was a record of who was still here. And I was the only one left. That I didn't leave the cabin all day after seeing that change on the list. I kept pacing the floor like a caged animal, chewing on the inside of my cheek and glancing out the window every few minutes like I was expecting someone to walk out of the trees. The part that messed with me the most wasn't even the fact that a new name had been added with a negative number, it was the handwriting. It was identical to the rest. Same angle, same pressure, same kind of half-printing style. But I hadn't written it. And I hadn't seen anyone come near the shed. So either someone was sneaking onto the property while I slept, which felt impossible with how obsessively I'd been watching, or there was something way worse going on. I kept hearing things, too. Not loud things. Just subtle stuff. A creak here, a thump there, like someone shifting their weight on old floorboards even though I was alone. At least I thought I was alone. The shadows in the corners of the cabin started to play tricks on me. I'd stare too long and swear I saw movement, just a subtle twitch, a flicker, like something had ducked out of sight a second too late. I finally worked up the nerve to go back out to the shed. It was just before sunset, that golden hour where everything looks soft and quiet, but the silence felt unnatural again, like the whole place was holding its breath. I opened the shed door slowly, half expecting something to be waiting inside. Nothing. Just the list on the wall, pinned to the inside of the cabinet. I stood there, staring at it, my eyes locked on that last entry. My name. Ethan Carter. And the number next to it, -1. It looked darker than the others, like it had been written recently. I don't even know how long I stood there before I realized something else was off. There was a mark on the floor. Just a faint smear near the base of the cabinet, like something had been dragged. I crouched down, heart pounding, and touched it. It was dry, whatever it was had been there for a while, but it had this weird reddish tint. That night I tried calling out again with my cell, just in case. Still no signal. I even drove my car a few hundred feet down the road hoping for a bar, but nothing. It was like the whole property was wrapped in dead air. When I got back to the cabin, the front door was slightly open. I knew I had locked it. I stood there for a few seconds just staring at it, every hair on my body standing on end. I didn't even go in right away. I just stood on the porch, flashlight in one hand, gripping the tire iron I kept under the front seat of my car in the other. Eventually, I pushed the door all the way open and stepped inside. Nothing looked out of place at first. But the moment I closed the door behind me, I felt it. The shift in the air. Like the temperature had dropped 10 degrees. My breath fogged slightly. I walked into the living room slowly, sweeping the flashlight beam across the walls, corners, furniture. There was a handprint on the inside of the window. On the glass. From the inside. It was faint and smeared, like whoever left it had been pressing against the glass and then slid their hand downward. I touched it. It was still slightly warm. I didn't sleep at all that night. I sat in the corner of the room with my back against the wall, clutching the tire iron like it was a lifeline. I kept all the lights on. Every now and then, I'd think I heard something outside, a twig snapping, a rustle in the brush, but I didn't check. I couldn't bring myself to. Sometime around 4 a.m., I must have dozed off, because I woke up to this horrible scraping noise. It sounded like metal on metal. Slow, deliberate. I shot up and realized it was coming from the front porch. I crept toward the door, completely frozen, and listened. The scraping stopped. I waited another 5 minutes before I cracked the door open and shined the flashlight out. There was something hanging from the porch railing. It was an old key. Just a single, rusted iron key dangling from a piece of fishing line tied to a nail in the wood. I didn't touch it. I just stared at it swinging gently in the cold breeze like a taunt. When I finally went outside, I noticed the gravel by the porch steps was disturbed, footprints. Bare ones. That was when I decided to figure out who the other names on the list were. I needed to know what had happened to them. I needed to know if I was really alone, or if someone else had survived whatever this was. I went through the old journals again and found a set of keys with tags on them, labeled with old room names I hadn't even noticed in the cabin before. There was a trapdoor in the hallway closet, hidden under a pile of firewood and a rug. It led to a basement I didn't know existed. I wish I had never opened that door. Everything smelled like rot down there. Like wet earth and mildew and something older. The floor was mostly dirt, the walls stone and unfinished. But against the far wall was something I never expected. Rows of shelves, and each shelf held something wrapped in burlap and duct tape. Bundles. About the size of shoe boxes. Some bigger. Some with labels. Each one had a name on it. Jason. Eric. Brian. Chris. I backed away slowly, stomach twisting. My foot caught on something and I stumbled. When I looked down, I saw a half-rotted leather work boot, partially buried in the dirt. Inside it, bones. I ran. I didn't stop to cover the trapdoor. I just ran straight out of the cabin and into the woods, not thinking about where I was going, just needing to move. The sun was just starting to rise, casting that pink-orange light across the trees. I remember the way it lit up the mist clinging to the forest floor. I didn't stop until I reached the far edge of the property, near the barbed wire fence that separated it from an empty pasture. When I finally caught my breath, I looked back. And there, in the distance, near the edge of the woods by the cabin, was that figure again. Watching me. Closer this time that I didn't go back to the cabin that morning. I wandered the edge of the property for hours, trying to make sense of everything. The list. The basement. The bundles. That key hanging on the porch. And now, that figure. Closer. Watching me. I felt like I was unraveling. Like my brain couldn't keep up with what was happening. Every time I tried to piece things together, something new would slide into view and shift everything all over again. Around noon, I went back, but I didn't go inside the cabin right away. I crouched in the brush and just watched it from a distance. I stared at the porch. That key was gone. Gone. I approached slowly, my feet crunching against the gravel path that now looked alien to me. I wasn't even sure I was walking toward the same cabin anymore. That's how much it felt like the place had changed. Like it had seen me in the basement and wasn't trying to pretend anymore. The door was open again. Just slightly. No wind that day. No storm. Just open. Inside was quiet. Still. The kind of stillness that feels fake. Like something holding its breath again. I stepped in, shut the door behind me, and stood in the entryway. I called out loud, "I know someone's been in here." My voice sounded thin. Stupid. Even I didn't believe it would matter. And then I noticed something different. The list. I don't even remember walking to the shed. I just remember suddenly being there, my eyes locked on that list again. My name, still there. Still, -1. But now someone had added a new column. Dates. All the names had them. Including mine. Mine was tomorrow. My body started to shake, not from fear this time, but from this building sense of helplessness. Like the world was caving in. I stared at the shed walls, hoping to find something, a journal, a message, a scribble in chalk. But there was nothing. Just dust and rust and that same cold, heavy air. When I stepped outside again, something changed. It was dead silent. No wind. No birds. Even the bugs had stopped. And then I heard something faint, a dragging sound, coming from behind the cabin. I moved slow, peeking around the side, expecting to see an animal or maybe a person. It was neither. There was a trench. A freshly dug trench in the dirt, maybe 5 feet long. Shallow. Like someone had started digging a grave and hadn't finished yet. A shovel leaned against a tree, crusted in fresh soil. I walked up to it slowly and saw something sticking out of the dirt. A corner of plastic. I got down on my knees and pulled it free. It was a phone. Not mine. Old model. Cracked screen. Still had battery. I powered it on and saw a message notification. Just one. From a contact named E. The message said, "The caretaker doesn't leave. The caretaker is buried." My blood ran cold. That night, I locked every door and window. I even dragged a dresser in front of the front door. I kept every light on. But it didn't matter. Around midnight, I heard it again. Footsteps. On the roof. Slow. Deliberate. Pacing. I held the tire iron with white knuckles and backed into the kitchen, trying not to breathe too loudly. Then the footsteps stopped. Silence again. Then came the knock. Not on the door. From underneath the cabin. It was faint. Muffled. But unmistakable. 3 slow knocks. Like someone was tapping on the floorboards from the crawlspace below. Then nothing. I stayed frozen in that spot until morning. When I finally dared to step outside, the air smelled like something sweet and rotten. There was a trail of dirt leading from the backyard toward the cabin. Not a foot trail. A dragging trail. Like something heavy had been pulled across the grass. I followed it with shaking legs. It led straight to the shed. Inside, the cabinet was open again. A new name was on the list. Ethan Carter was now crossed out. Underneath it, in fresh ink, was a new name I'd never seen before. Jake Hammond. No number. Just a fresh name. I had one thought, I'm already dead. I just hadn't caught up to it yet. And then I heard something behind me. Breathing. Right behind my left shoulder. When I turned, nothing was there, just empty air and the swaying trees outside the shed door. I ran. I got in my car and drove like I was being hunted. Because maybe I was. I didn't even have a plan, I just kept the pedal down until I saw the first gas station miles off the main road. When I walked in, I must have looked like hell. Dirt-streaked, wild-eyed, shaking. The guy behind the counter didn't say anything at first. Just stared. Then he asked me something that knocked the wind out of me. "You were at the old Maxwell property, weren't you?" I nodded slowly, throat dry. He let out a long breath and rubbed his jaw. "I thought that place was shut down after the last kid went missing. 2 years ago." I asked him what he meant. "What kid? What happened?" He wouldn't tell me. He just shook his head and said, "Don't go back there." I slept in my car that night, parked in a Walmart lot under a buzzing streetlight, every sound outside jarring me awake. I don't even know what day it is now. I'm writing this from a borrowed laptop, trying to find out who Jake Hammond is. I need to know if he's real. If he's next. Or if maybe, he's already been there, watching me. I don't think it's over. I don't think it ever ends, that I don't know why I didn't leave sooner. Maybe I thought I could outrun it. That somehow if I put enough distance between me and that place, it would all stop. The list. The names. The footsteps. The figure watching me from the woods. The thing tapping under the cabin floor. But I was wrong. I was wrong. It was always going to catch up to me. And when it does, it's worse than you could ever imagine. I spent the next few days trying to get answers. I went to every news site, every local forum, every police report. I searched for Jake Hammond. I found nothing. I looked up Maxwell's property. Nothing. Every trace of that place was like it never existed. There were no records, no reports. The only thing that came up was a single old post on a local message board. It was from 2 years ago. Some guy named Trent had written a long, rambling post, talking about something weird going on in the woods near the Maxwell property. He claimed people had been going missing for decades, and that the caretaker, whoever he was, had been running some sort of twisted ritual. The post was riddled with spelling mistakes and incoherent rambling, but it ended with one chilling line. The caretaker doesn't leave. He's buried there. Under the house. Under all the houses. I couldn't make sense of it. But I knew one thing for sure now. Whoever had written the list, whoever had crossed out my name and written, Jake Hammond, they knew me. They knew I was next. I tried to get away. I tried to leave, to move somewhere safe. But every time I tried to leave, something happened. My car broke down on the way to the bus station. My phone died at the worst possible moments. It was like the world itself was stopping me from running. I went to the police. I tried to tell them everything, the list, the bodies, the messages, the phone and the dirt, but they didn't take me seriously. They thought I was just some scared kid who had been alone too long in the woods. They couldn't understand. How could they? They didn't know what I'd seen. What I'd heard. What I had felt. One night, I was sitting in my hotel room, staring at the cracked screen of my phone. That's when I got the message. It was from an unknown number. It said, "Your name is on the list. It's almost time." I swear, my heart stopped in my chest. I couldn't breathe. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know who to trust anymore. Every time I thought I was free, I was pulled back in. Like the walls were closing in on me. Then came the phone call. It was late. Way past midnight. I had just gotten back to my room after another fruitless search for Jake Hammond's name. The call was static at first. The kind of crackling that makes you think you're about to hear something important, but then all you get is the buzz of a bad connection. But then I heard a voice. It was low. Slow. Almost a whisper. Jake. Jake Hammond. He's next. The list is never done. I jumped out of bed, heart pounding. The voice sounded so familiar. I couldn't place it. But it was the same voice that had been whispering to me all those nights. In the cabin. Outside the shed. Underneath the porch. The voice was inside my head now. I grabbed my things and ran again. But this time, I didn't stop. I couldn't. I drove straight through the night. I didn't even know where I was going. I just knew I had to get away from this place. From this nightmare. I ended up at a gas station on the outskirts of town at dawn. I didn't care about food, or sleep, or anything. All I could think about was the voice. The list. The names. The whispers. As I filled up the tank, I looked up at the sign. The name of the station was familiar. It didn't make sense at first. Then it hit me. Maxwell's Market. I froze. My hands went numb. The hairs on the back